Kayaks were developed over a 5,000-year period in Alaska. They were a superb hunting craft, uniquely suited to the needs of the Eskimo and Aleut peoples. Watch Kayak, a film based on the exhibition at the Alaska State Museum. To the early Eskimos and Aleuts, kayaks were living things, which they were born to and buried with. As a craft used for a special purpose, the kayak has no equal.
There is a story that is told of a man who came to dance upon the sea. He used to watch the sea lions that live on the island near his village. When they were on the rocks, they were fat and clumsy and boisterous and foolish. They were strangers on the land. But when they would dive into the deep salt sea, they would be transformed. They would hit the water, and their bodies would lengthen, sleeken, their flippers would spread out and become giant water wings, and they would glide beneath the surface. They were mounted warriors riding on the sea. They were things of grace and beauty. They were like Raven when he puts on his wing cape and transforms himself from a man into a soaring bird. And this man would leave the rookery and trudge back to his village, over the land, over the rocks, slowly and clumsily. He seemed to himself like a sea lion upon the rocks. So he built a kayak. He built it to become an extension of his body. He learned to make it fly upon the waves. He came to dance upon the sea. He came to be like a sea mammal. Like Raven in his wing cape, he became a thing of grace and beauty.
The Arctic kayak is more than just a boat. Kayaks were developed over a 5,000-year period. They represent the artistry and ingenuity of man in fashioning a superior means of transportation in an unforgiving climate. But kayaks appeal to us on an even deeper level, representing man becoming at one with the sea. They are an almost perfect solution to the needs of the Arctic people, allowing a single hunter to move with total freedom through harsh northern seas.
When the European explorers arrived in the late 1700s, kayaks were used by all Eskimo and Aleut peoples in Alaska and Siberia. Because of the diverse sea and weather conditions over this vast area, as many as 40 distinct kayak designs were developed, each uniquely suited to local needs.
Two major types seem to have evolved. One was used for hunting sea mammals in open water, and the other was used inland, mostly for hunting caribou when they crossed rivers and lakes. The inland boats are usually very long, very narrow, and usually round-bottomed to get the least amount of wetted surface area so that they can go faster.
Distinctive kayak types were found in Siberia with the sleek inland-style Chukchi and the curious squat Koryak. In Alaska, there was the superbly seaworthy Aleut kayak and the closely related Pacific Eskimo. The Bering Sea kayak was large and rugged, while the Bering Strait Eskimos developed a lighter, more graceful variety. In northern Alaska, they used a long, swift kayak both inland and in protected bays, which could be easily moved by sled over pack ice to the edge of the sea. The journals of the early European explorers reveal how impressed they were by these unique kayaks.
The boats of the Aleuts are superior. A perfect symmetry, smoothness, and proportion constitute beauty. They are beautiful. To me, they appeared so beyond anything I had ever beheld. Their first appearance struck me with amazement beyond expression.
The kayak used by the natives on Kotzebue Sound, and in fact along the entire coast to Point Barrow, is a marvel of speed and beauty. It is very narrow and light, and great skill is required in its management. Each man's kayak is built according to the specifications of his own body, and hence is peculiarly fitted to his use.
The design of sea kayaks was based on a number of different things. The boat had to be seaworthy so that the person could go out and do his hunting and get back. It had to have some way of getting to the game and of carrying the game back. So different people use different methods. The kayaks are made from usually driftwood that comes down from the inland rivers where storms wash down very large trees. So areas of the Arctic that are treeless actually do have wood available. Most of the sea kayaks are covered in some sort of sealskin. Some of them use bearded seal, which is heavier and stronger. Others in the Aleutian Island area could be covered with sea lion skin also. The kayaks were made 5,000 or 1,000 years ago, the same as they were made historically at the turn of the century. The covers were stitched together with sinews. The wood itself, the framework, was tied together using sealskin hide. Sometimes roots were used, and sometimes other materials such as baleen. We're looking at a fairly typical North Alaska Kotzebue Sound, Point Barrow type of kayak. The kayak is a style of its own in that it originally is an inland type of kayak. One of the things that's fairly unique in the building of this kayak is how the wood was gathered. Any other place in the Arctic, wood had to be gathered from beaches using driftwood, where these people were close enough to trees that they could go and get living trees that would bend more easily, especially when making the ribs. The builders of kayaks didn't have any measuring devices. The length of a kayak in that particular community would be 2.5 arm spans, and the width of it at the widest part would be from the elbow to the tip of the little finger. Most of the construction techniques that Dick used were standard kayak construction techniques. For instance, when he made the kayak ribs, he bent them cold without steaming, just by holding them in his mouth and using his teeth as a clamp and bending them slowly and carefully. I am biased, and I think the Aleut kayak was the finest kayak in all of Alaska. The Aleut one-hole kayak is a superb craft for handling as a sea kayak. There was a 1-hole, 2-hole, and a 3-hole. And the 3-hole was actually introduced by the Russians. They wanted to be able to have their missionary, trader, or explorer in the middle cockpit while they hired 2 Aleuts to paddle them around. The 2-hole became very popular because it was the means of hunting the sea otter. The Aleut kayak builders had some very special speed secrets, and they were special bone joints that were put into the kayak at various places, partly to reduce friction when pieces of wood rubbed across each other, and the kayak works like a fish and moves and bends and is an alive thing, and maybe it worked the same way. Bow shape often has a very thin part at the bottom that's a cutwater. Then there's a slit in the bow called a bifid bow, and the top is sort of bulbous. This is very functional in large waves. When the bow of the kayak starts dropping down into a wave, the top part, which has more volume, will give added buoyancy and pull the bow back up again. while the bottom part of the cutwater will keep the boat moving straight through the water and tracking well. Very often, we find kayaks that have symbolic bows and sterns. That is, they represent some sort of animal that could have been the helping spirit of the kayak owner. The Nunivak kayak has some interesting designs on the cockpit stanchions. The one on the right that's smiling represents maleness and good luck, and the one on the left represents femaleness and bad luck. Kayaks were basically a male-oriented hunting implement. Some women would occasionally use them, especially if they were going fishing. They could use them for ferrying goods across a small stream, but as a general rule, women were not the hunters and they didn't build them, use them. It was extremely important for a young man to own a kayak and to be proficient at hunting with it. Without such a device, which was the major hunting tool used, he couldn't support a family. He wouldn't have a wife, he'd have no one to take care of himself, and he'd be really lost. So a kayak in many ways was the keystone of his whole existence. Usually, young boys started very early playing with kayak models, and sometimes even by the age of 6 or 7 in actually doing exercises to develop certain muscles for good kayaking. Some places they would even have smaller kayaks a young person could use first and gradually work up to a full-size one. In places like the Aleutian Islands and Pacific Eskimo areas, they could use two-hull kayaks to train, because there an older man could be in one of the hatches while the young person was in the other learning the kayak strokes. The spring hunting was a very special time, and men prepared in many different ways, new clothing, getting their kayaks refurbished, but especially they had to stay away from the women. They had to remain clean because it was thought that any women who were nearby, who were menstruating especially, could cause bad luck in the hunt. So the women remained away from the men's house once they had finished sewing covers on the kayaks. The Chukchi kayak is of great interest to me because there was such little material known about them. The inland Chukchi kayak has a paddle that has large blades at the end, and often there was a knife or spear type point that was lashed onto the end of one of the paddle, so that when the person was going after caribou, he could just jab it with his spear, usually just behind the ribs, then keep paddling to get out of the way. The Koryak kayak is a very short and very wide kayak. It's probably the shortest kayak in the Arctic. The Koryak paddles are actually two small hand paddles, not much bigger than a ping pong paddle. The paddles were attached to the boat so that if the person wanted to quickly pick up a harpoon, he wouldn't lose his paddle. Most references say that the Koryak people were not great kayakers.
It is incomprehensible how people, for the sake of a few eggs, can trust themselves out at sea in such wretched canoes as they build. Their lives are in manifest danger at every moment.
The Bering Sea kayaks and the Bering Strait kayaks had rather large cockpits, and they could carry 2 people inside, but the 2 people had to sit back to back. If they just needed to cross a stream, you could put a couple of children inside the kayak and even put 2 more people on the deck, so you could carry 6 people for a short distance. Kayaks were self-contained watercraft and carried all of the items necessary to hunt, fish, repair damage, and survive all conditions. Here are some of the items the kayaker carried with him. This single-bladed paddle is typically found throughout much of Alaska. The paddle blade itself is often painted with red, black, or sometimes blue designs, and the wooden part is heavily ridged to provide extra strength. Many kayakers carried darts with them. These were used especially to hunt sea otters. The dart was used with what's called a throwing board, which was held in this hand, attached in the back, and when the item was thrown, the throwing board acted as extra leverage to the arm. When the dart hit the animal, the barbed point came off in the animal, detached from the shaft, unwound from the shaft, to which it was still attached by this line, and then the shaft acted as a drag to prevent the animal from fleeing very far. For survival conditions, another common item found, especially with the Aleut, was a wooden bailing tube. This piece is cut in two down the middle, hollowed out, and used by putting one end down in the water that may have accumulated in the kayak, sucking it up through this end, and then holding it overboard and letting the water drain out. For hunting larger game, a harpoon would have been used, and the harpoon shaft had the harpoon line attached to it with the point. The end of this harpoon line was attached to a sealskin float, which was inflated and kept on the after deck. After the man harpooned the sea mammal, the shaft came away, and the float was thrown overboard, and this acted as a drag to prevent the animal from escaping. The harpoon line that was coiled up was originally carried on the foredeck in this special line holder decorated with seal pieces in the front here made from ivory. Another item that was very important was a large gaff. And this device was used especially in areas where there was a lot of flow ice to use this end to pull yourself over to the flow to get onto it, or this piece up here could be used to push off from it. And the shaft is rather long to allow people to get to flows that were far away. Another major item that the kayaker used when hunting in ice flow conditions was a kayak sled. And this kayak is sitting on such a sled. He would use this to haul the kayak over to open water. Once in open water, the kayak would be put in the water and the sled put on the deck in the back and carried along until the next ice flow was reached. One of the items used for survival conditions and for normal use was this sea mammal bladder. This was filled with water and used as a canteen, but in times of survival conditions, perhaps a hole in the boat, the canteen could be emptied of water and filled with air, then used as a buoyancy bag. He could perhaps fit the buoyancy bag on the side of the kayak or stuff several of them up in the ends of the kayak to have extra buoyancy. The hat used by many kayakers is a very special device. It's made out of wood. It took sometimes a year to make because it had to be very specially curved out of one piece of wood and without breaking it. So that the value of one of these hats was sometimes very high, as much as a kayak, as much as a slave. The hat is highly decorated with bird feathers and with carved ivory pieces on it. The underside of the hat is usually dark in color, and this is to prevent glare from the water reaching the kayaker. The visor is long in the front to help shed salt water from the kayaker's face. The sea otters loved beauty, and they would more likely let themselves be killed by an Aleut who came at them in a beautiful kayak and dressed beautifully than by someone who didn't.
Kayaks in Alaska were primarily hunting craft. They were swift and silent. The single blade was paddled with 1 or 2 strokes on each side. The double blade paddle enabled you to paddle faster because during the entire stroke, the blade was in the water more of the time. But with the single blade, since you had to lift it for steering between strokes, it was less efficient as a propulsion device. So it was slower, but it had other advantages. One advantage was that you could paddle mostly on one side if you were stalking an animal and not be seen as easily as you would with a double blade paddle. In order to survive in stormy seas, some kayakers learned to right their kayaks after they capsized. They would use the single blade paddle for this in Alaska. And they developed a method of rolling the kayak that involved holding the paddle across the chest, capsizing in the direction of the handle, swept it around, and then brought it downward. And that brought them back to the surface. This was a very efficient method of rolling.
Modern sea kayaking has flourished in recent years as a growing number of people discover this adventurous and intimate means of exploring the ocean. Kayaking offers an unparalleled opportunity for viewing wildlife and scenery along dramatic coastlines like this one in the Inside Passage of southeastern Alaska. This daring descent of Alaska's Devil's Canyon is a rather extreme example of another modern sport called whitewater kayaking. This wild river sport, which has become quite popular, is similar to its distant cousin sea kayaking in name only.
The kayaks are completely different. They're made to maneuver fast and go around obstacles, whereas sea kayaks are meant to track in one direction, to carry a lot of gear, and to be very stable.
Modern sea kayaks are made of contemporary materials like canvas and fiberglass. But designers of modern kayaks are reaching back to the Arctic roots of the sea kayak and rediscovering the highly sophisticated design features that were proven during its 5,000 years of development.
I like kayaks because when I'm in one, I'm close to the water, I'm close to the feel of what it must have been like to have to hunt for your own living, to see what the Eskimo life is about.
I sing to the sea. I sing to my kayak. It is part of my body. We fly upon the waves. It is my companion. It is my brother. It is my wife. If we die on the sea, we die together. We go down together and remain together. If I die an old man, it will rest upon my grave. And still we go on together. And still we remain together.